Well, it's really nice to meet you. Hi, I'm Katie.
Likewise. Hi, nice to meet you, Katie.
I have been following your page for like 2 years now on
Oh,
Facebook.
wow. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I was just really surprised when you reached back out to me and were willing to do this. So thank
Yeah,
you so
no, I'm
much
happy
for your
to.
time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy. It should be fun. You're in Sweden?
Yes, I am. I'm an expat in Sweden,
That's
married
awesome.
to a Swede.
Very cool. How did you end up in Sweden?
We met when we were missionaries with a theater company called Covenant Players. And we
Cool.
met in Germany and settled down here. Found out we were having the girls in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, life has led us all over the place.
Sounds like it. That's cool though.
This past year has just been so rough. And I was so excited that Morton got me this for Christmas.
That's really sweet. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was something that I really had wanted to read ever since you were doing your giveaway and having people post pictures with their clothes laid out. It was like, I want to read it, but I was like keeping so many things that I wanted to do at arm's length for the
Yeah.
longest time.
Oh,
Like I want to
mhm.
be an ally for LGBTQ people, but I don't want anyone to know about it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I
No, I've
want
been
to
there.
I want to shake things off, but I'm so scared of what people will think. But
Yeah.
I'm like turning over a new leaf on my channel, and I'm just like I'm not taking any more guff about racism. People can leave. I'm I'm having a conversation with a queer pastor I met on TikTok.
That's great.
Pretty soon, he's gonna go over all the ways that people use the Bible to hurt LGBTQ people.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I've been steadily losing subscribers, but that's how it goes.
It is. I offer my encouragement. It's not easy, like it's a lot of it's really relative too. I'm in a place in life where um I don't have to worry about like an employer or like someone looking over my shoulder. And I'm keenly aware of how much of a difference that makes in my ability to say things,
Mm,
publicly without having to risk, losing income. My wife's a physician, so she's in a totally different world, and they could care less what I think about, Donald Trump or Jesus or, anything, which is great, but I've got a lot of friends that are not, in a situation. So I try to take advantage of that privilege,
mm,
for the sake of others that can't speak out, because I get messages all the time from, pastors or, fellow writers or things like that, either amening what I said or, are frustrated that, if they say the same thing that, they'll lose subscribers or they'll lose their church position or, it creates, family rifts. And, that's certainly the case with me. I've got family and friends that, I either don't talk to anymore or they don't talk to me or, we certainly avoid subjects that maybe we talked about, in the past because we moved in different directions. But, I think, speaking the truth is hard. It's hard to know that what we're actually saying is something that actually is true. I mean, that's what I deal
mm.
with in the Unraptured, obviously, is, I was just as convinced, that the rapture was going to happen as I am that racism is wrong, but only one of those two things is true, and so, having people around you and, to that you trust, not like random internet strangers on Twitter, who are, trying to tell you what to say or like, whatever. But, people whose guidance and wisdom, that you listen to already, I think are really helpful, as you progress, as you
Yeah,
uh, change your, beliefs and as you put yourself out there more, for sure,
yeah.
because you'll have people that will troll you and attack you. And, the biggest piece of advice I could give you is don't read the comments, which is pretty generic piece of advice, but don't really care what people, say. I mean, unless you have this like mountain of people like, hey, that's really racist. You shouldn't say that, or something, that's like obvious that you just have a blind spot to.
Mm.
But you're always going to make people mad, even when you're doing things that seem good and kind and loving, somebody's going to yell at you because you forgot about X, Y, or Z, so um,
It's like because the truth of the gospel is not there. I've there's the escapist Christianity, there's like, yeah, we don't have to deal with any of the stuff. Jesus is coming soon. And the Matthew 25 gospel that's like, yes, it's so annoying. It's so frustrating dealing with people who refuse to accept that Jesus has anything to do with politics and has anything to do with justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're almost always white, which is what I try to call my, fellow white folks' attention to, is that, I mean, that's white privilege, is that, you can say that Jesus doesn't, need to be involved in our politics, because politics don't really affect your life. It doesn't really affect, as a middle-class white guy, Donald Trump was terrible, but he didn't really affect my life, in the way that he did, my LGBT friends or immigrant friends or, friends of color, things like that. So yeah, I get that, constantly. And it's, it's a big irony, because Jesus was executed, as an enemy of the state. You don't really get much more political than that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, reading this has been like a real balm to my spirit, because
I appreciate that. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, that's something that all of us artists, we need to hear that feedback, because we just make something and we put it out there and we just don't know.
Absolutely.
So it's great to get the chance to say that it's like, I'm starting to feel like I can breathe a little bit more, because it's like the stages of grief coming out of evangelicalism, coming out of believing in the rapture. There's this grief in the anger stage of just like, oh, I've been lied to so much.
Yeah. This is going to sound like name dropping, and I don't mean it to be. That just who was there.
Name drop away.
So I was at this Red Letter Christian retreat several years ago with like Shane Claiborne, Brian
So
McLaren.
cool.
Yeah, Shane's great. He's awesome. But anyway, we and Tony Campollo was there, and it was like I was fangirling out on a lot of people. But it was when I was going through, oh man, this was, goodness gracious, 7-8 years ago. Really deconstruction, maybe not in the middle of it, towards the end, but at that point where you start losing friends, was where I was. And we were talking about that, and I had the chance to talk to him, and we brought it to the small group. It was like, at one point in time, he was like the poster child for, online heretics that are, you know what I mean? Like people who are getting blasted as that, as leading people astray, things like that. And I remember I literally was crying. It's like, yeah, I don't know how to deal with, relationships with best friends and family members that, I was once really close to and could talk to about anything. And now we're kind of walking on eggshells, and I'll say, like, the grief is real. I mean, I've sat, in front of those same people, and whether it's, you or me or somebody, famous like Brian or Shane or Tony or whatever, like, I think everybody goes through that, and all I say, you're not alone. I mean, I've shed many real, actual and metaphorical tears, over, what's a good, healthy process, of doing self-examination and reflection. But it's not easy, that's for sure.
It really hurts. How did your faith get rekindled after letting go of the rapture and all that anger and sadness?
That's a great question. I think it started with this thing. I think I talked about this in the book. It's called the Summer Ministry Team, is what they call it. They've got a fancier name for it now. When I was in college, my former youth pastor asked me to get involved. And, essentially we traveled to church camps, for the summer all around the Southeast United States. And I helped lead games and played in the worship band and things like that. And I was going just because it was a paycheck and, free Chick-fil-A, for lunch, on the road trips. But I found that my passion for like youth ministry, that had definitely disappeared at that point, was rekindled. I really enjoyed being invested in other people's lives, helping young folks grow, and now it's people in general, not just like teenagers. But I think that really set the foundation in ways that I even now just kind of begin to understand, because then it was like, oh, hey, here's a career path again that I really like and I could do, as opposed to working, like a 9-to-5 job, the cliche office space. I really liked that. But I think what I really liked most of all was the relationships, and beginning to see that faith had a practical impact on people's lives. that it wasn't just this abstract altar call moment, and then a life of not sinning, or trying not to sin so that you can get here, that there was this sort of this pragmatic component, fundamental component, as I would argue now, to the gospel that I hadn't seen before. And so getting back into that, into like daily ministry, even though that wasn't really my goal at the time, I think really started me back on a path of, maybe there's something about this Jesus that is worth hanging on to. Maybe if I look at this gospel again, maybe there is still some good news there that I just didn't see before.
And I think that is what has been so hard about all this isolation is, I don't know about if you're an introvert or extrovert, where you're on that spectrum, but I am an extrovert. And so being away from people made my faith take an extra beating, on top of being so disappointed in people that I trusted and respected, getting caught up in conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, no, either with you. I like people, I like especially like right before the pandemic started, actually going about 6 months before the pandemic and all the shutdowns, we had started these monthly get-togethers with several families from our church. It wasn't a small group meeting. We weren't getting together and having devotionals or going through some sort of curriculum or anything like that. We just got together and our kids played, and I made barbecue or we did a potluck kind of thing, and we just hung out and caught up on life and talked about whatever we wanted to talk about. It. There was nothing formal about it, but it was still like this deeply enriching time, I think, for all of us. And there was a spectrum of folks from, friends that, pretty conservative, to people who would describe themselves as, being fairly moderate, to flaming liberals, like me and my wife. And it was just great. It was church in a very, abstract way, but in a very, meaningful way. And so, that's what, brought me back, was that community of having those friends and loved ones and knowing that people are there for you. And, the past year, I still know they're there, we still FaceTime or, as things are kind of slowly getting back normal over here with people getting vaccinated and things like that, I can, see my parents again and stuff like that. But yeah, it's been draining for sure.
Having these conversations, I've been uploading these Zoom conversations every week since the summer, and a lot of them really have been free therapy / church.
Yes, yeah, no, it's so good to like talk to another adult instead of just 5 and 7 year olds all day, or yelling at my dog to stop eating underwear. It's a nice change of pace.
Definitely. How can we grow in humility and seeing that we don't know it all?
By reading my book. No, I'm just
kidding.
I think service and travel, there should be humility in service, but I think a lot of times, particularly in the kind of evangelicalism that I grew up in, service was charity, and there was sort of a power play involved there, where I'm boosting my ego, because I'm doing the right thing, I'm loving people, and that was as much at play as it was actually helping people. And so I think when I say service, I think finding regular routine ways to serve people so that it becomes a way of life and not just this moment, where, hey, I fed people at Thanksgiving, or I volunteered this one time, at church, or I went on a mission trip, but that service becomes a way of life, and that you're serving people in anonymity. I think it can help build that humility, so that like I started, okay, I'm going to contradict myself because I'm going to talk about something that I've been doing instead of being anonymous about it. But back during when the pandemic started and people, started losing their jobs and things, we're trying to find ways, my wife and I were to help. And food is my love language, especially barbecue. And so we started getting friends together, and we would make barbecue and make meals and serve them, take them to people. And it was this awkward tension for me of like, well, I've got to be public with this to get help, to do this, because we can't pull it off. But like, so there's always this like fine line of like, you want to help and you want to do things, and you need people involved and things like that. But I think a lot of times, it's easy to succumb to the temptation to like pat yourself on the back or make those opportunities about you. And so like what I've tried to do and like continuing with that is trying to serve in anonymity as much as I can, so that it's kind of like Jesus said, like your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing. And so that you're keeping the focus on the act of service instead of how it makes you feel. And so, especially when it becomes a regular thing, it becomes more difficult because it's easy to show up, once or twice a year. But when service becomes a regular part of your life where you have to make time for it, where you have to sacrifice, money or finances or time or whatever, that helps you invest more in it, and helps become less about you. And as it becomes less about you, you begin to understand and know and love the people you serve, and they stop being just objects of your charity, become, real human beings. And you begin to understand, their actual needs as well, and how you can help them instead of just using them. And then with travel, what I mean by that is it not necessarily, obviously, in a pandemic, it's not easy to, or we really, shouldn't be, gallivanting across the country or world or the world. But, Mark Twain has that famous quote that travel is fatal to prejudice. And, I think in my experience, what that means is not just that you have to, getting on a plane and going to, Sweden or Africa or Mexico, or wherever, that's radically different than, perspective, as an American for me. But traveling across your street, across cultural lines, across religious lines, across racial lines, traveling outside of your comfort zone, so that you get to see that the world is so much bigger than you, and that the world moves and turns and goes on, whether or not you're part of it at all. And so as you get out and see how much bigger and diverse the world is, and how small a part of it that you are, that hopefully, that induces some humility. I mean, that's the goal. It doesn't magically work out that way, because you could, go travel the world and just post on Instagram the whole time. Not that there's anything wrong with Instagram. I love Instagram. I think you have to develop, I think the key or the connection between those is just developing a basic sense of empathy, of caring about people other than yourself, and not in just altruistic ways, and not in ways that help you just feel better, but like genuinely actually caring about what would make a family cross a desert, to legally enter a country, like why would they put them and their children at risk? And so like, it's whatever you can do, whether it's service or travel, or maybe there's something else, maybe it's art or music, or I don't know, business. Developing that sense of empathy, I think is key to a Christianity that is relevant and worth believing in.
You talked about one of my favorite things in a book, in the Chronicles of Narnia, with Eustace in the dragon skin.
Yeah.
And you're like, yes, that is so on point to us thinking we can do it ourselves. We can become humble. We can take off our pride and our fear and or whatever, but we just can't.
Yeah. It's a weird thing, learning humility, because there has to be initiative, most of the time. Well, I don't even want to say most of the time, some of the time, a lot of times. I mean, life can be hard and you can still be arrogant, life can be difficult and you can see yourself as pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, even though, there were people helping you all along the way. But yeah, I think that more than anything, I mean, humility is what's missing from Christianity today. It's, we've got it all figured out and we have all the right answers and we're the only ones going to heaven, and all the different problems and issues that flow from that hubris, are crazy.
American evangelicals are like proud about the dumbest things, like yeah. Christmas, like how they celebrate Christmas. I don't know, that was a dumb example, but
no. I know we there's this melding, American evangelicalism with American patriotism. And so
yes,
we're like we're the best, we're number one. And so there's this idea that if you're not number one in the best, that you're bad, and that because you're American, you're inherently the best at everything, and so that marriage, of evangelicalism with patriotism creates some really weird things that we are prideful about, that, or that we care about, that just don't matter, to anyone. Which, again, get outside of your American evangelical bubble, whether that's traveling across the street around the world, and realize that not everybody does things the way that we do.
One of the problems that I have is that I grew up in a Pentecostal bubble. Mm-hmm. And so it was all about the feelings, Yeah. So I would think, if I didn't cry at a service, then I didn't experience God. So now, after going through so much disappointment and isolation and all these things, now I'm just like, I'm distrustful of any feelings. And I'm like, is this music trying to manipulate me into feeling like, I'm like, stay away from me, feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in, Church of Nazarene, and we grew up, Nazarene Church, came about the same time as Pentecostalism did, with Azusa Street and that kind of stuff. And, if you didn't raise your hands, or you didn't, go down to the altar, or you weren't entirely sanctified, if you didn't have this definitive kind of movement of the Spirit, there wasn't like any outward, guilt. There wasn't like any, the pastor wasn't sitting here, you don't come down the altar, you're going to hell. I mean, some of them do, but my upbringing wasn't that dramatic most of the time. But there definitely was a sense of, like, you would look around and you see people raising their hands or running the aisles or whatever. And, you want that, you want that sort of passion and love and excitement, which is totally normal, to want, those sorts of things. And then as you deconstruct, and like you said, you go through this, like, well, am I just being, emotionally manipulated here? And in some sense you are, but like at this other sense, like, incense and altars and stained glass windows and manipulate our emotions just as much as, Hillsong. And so there's not anything inherently wrong with that, because I mean, you do want to create, sacred space and things like that, just like if you go to a spa, you're having your, emotions manipulated. I think, the key is learning, is the wisdom of trying to decipher, okay, are these, emotions leading me to love God and my neighbor more, are they leading me, towards more self-centeredness? And, that's not something you figure out, in a day or a year. I kind of think that's one of those, lifetime adventures that all of us are on.
Process of being saved.
Yes.
It's just like, all the Christianese from your whole life, and then it all starts to just sound so icky. as it's been used to hurt people and alienate people.
Yeah, and I think, the trick, for those of us that are coming out of it and are deconstructing, and certainly for me, is making space for people who aren't on the same place in the journey. Maybe they haven't even started it yet. And one of the things I struggle with are those folks who, aren't bothered by Christianese the way that I am, and don't see how off-putting it can be for folks outside the church. And, if I'm wanting to like reach, oh gosh, I mean, I'm already defaulting to Christianese, reach people. But if I'm wanting to like just talk or have a conversation, about Jesus, or about anything faith related with folks outside, the church, as soon as you start, bringing Christianese, those are triggering folks who have come out of evangelicalism, and it's a totally foreign language to folks that haven't even, been evangelical. And so but if you bring that up to folks who are, still firmly in it, then they're offended. And so it just becomes this like, beating your head against the wall kind of moment where you have to discover Christ-like patience that I have not yet discovered.
It's but I'm like on it. When I was a missionary in Germany, traveling with Germans, and I realized I can't use my language. I can't use my cultural references, my idioms, my similes, whatever, metaphors, whatever is not straightforward language. For one thing, I don't even have the words for it in German. For the other thing, they won't know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. I mean, if you're evangelical, the idea is you're trying to spread this good news, of this gospel, but like, how are you doing that? By speaking, in a language that no one understands, but your inner circle,
Mhm.
because exactly, I mean, it might as well be a foreign language, even, it's, yeah. And it's doubly frustrating for me because I think, at least I know the case was for me, that I threw around a lot of those terms and didn't really understand what they meant. Kingdom of God, like where's their kingdom outside of Riyadh? Like in 21st century planet Earth. And so it's like, what does it mean to be saved? Like, what are you saved from? Like atonement? Like these are really weighty terms.
Yeah.
If you're saying Jesus was God, like how does that actually work? And so like I think a lot of times we get out over our skis a little bit without even realizing it, and then we get angry when we don't, people press us on it, and really it's defensiveness because we don't actually understand the language that we're talking about. But then when you get to that point too, anyway, it's just, yeah, it's a difficult process. And I think, as much as like humility is needed, I think patience, is just as important for all of us.
Yeah. It gives me hope that it's a lot simpler than a lot of the language, that loving people, accepting people is not so complicated.
No. Yeah, the details can get complicated and difficult to live out, but there's a reason Jesus said the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God, and second, it's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not that all these things that come out of life and all these answers are to questions we're trying to understand, and these mysteries that we can't fathom. It's not that they're not important, and obviously theology, has its place and important, but if we can't do that simple stuff of showing love to people next to us, like who cares if you understand the details of the Trinity? Like what good is that, if you fathom all mysteries but have not love? I mean, like
Mhm.
Paul says that for a reason.
Yeah. I guess it's just really hard to know how to get back into faith,
Yeah.
and it feels so far away. Like knowing that I was having this conversation with you, I was like, "Oh, okay, I gotta actually finish this book." It was like an excuse to like make time to pick it back up, because I'm just like throwing myself into my work just like I did when I was a missionary. Like so many times, so many years, I was there for 12 years. I was like going through the motions
Yeah.
of saying that I was doing it for God, and just praying, okay, God bless this work. Okay, I don't know, that's enough. That's all we have time to pray for today. Now we've got to work.
Yeah.
I wasn't deconstructing then. I never ever thought that I would be in a place where I would need to reconstruct, because I was always so strong. I
Yeah.
was so rock solid. I was like, everyone else may fall away, but I'm not me.
Yeah, no, I was the same way. And I think the thing that can kind of be deceptive about like books like mine or other folks is that, you sit down and you can read, Unraptured and, if you really wanted to, a couple days or a day, whatever, a week or so, and you get my journey that lasted several years, compressed down into a few days. And so it can seem like the process of deconstruction and reconstruction, which I would wholeheartedly say I'm still going through, is kind of short when, it can take many, many years, if not longer, and it's going to look radically different, for everyone. I'm lucky that I, have a really good, rational, non-MAGA close, circle of parents and, and friends that I can rely on and can come back to. And that's just not the case, for everyone. Some people have horrible parents, and some people are, isolated because work in random places, and don't have close circle of friends. And so you have to turn elsewhere. And, it's just not easy, and I'm wary of anyone that offers, a how-to guide,
Yeah,
of how to
7 easy
put,
steps.
yeah, they just don't exist.
Yeah.
It's very individual. If there's one part that's individualistic about this, it's individualistic in the sense of how you find yourself in a new community, because it's definitely not going about it by yourself. I see that a lot, even with, progressive circles, you deconstruct and now you reconstruct a faith that ends up looking a whole lot like yourself. And that's something I'm very, suspicious of. But I think it's about finding a new and healthier community. But that communal process is still kind of individualistic and certainly not easy.
I am all about community. That is one of the things I'm so passionate about. And that's one of the reasons that YouTube I haven't gotten bored of that after being on there for 2 years. Because it's like, yes, building community and connect. And I have like multiple different Facebook groups. Some I've continued on, most I haven't, because I start a project, but I don't see it through. Once it doesn't seem like anybody's actually interested in doing it with me.
Yeah, no, I got you. I have a close group of a Facebook group that we came together several years ago, and it's been a balm for my soul for several years now.
I think I'm just like feeling like I don't want to pray and not get an answer and feel like I'm wasting my time. Like I went from one day to the next of waking up early and reading my Bible and writing to like the next day kind of feeling like, what am I even doing this for?
Yeah, I think that is the hardest thing about faith, is having faith in the face of silence. I think I mentioned this in the book, but after Mother Teresa died, they published her journals, which she didn't want to happen. And she was actually very clear that they'd be destroyed. So I felt kind of guilty reading them, but they published them. And one of the things that really stuck out to folks was the fact that she said that she had not felt the presence of God in 50 years. I think she died in her 80s. So 2/3 of her life, she, don't quote me on that math, I'm very bad at math. Almost 2/3 of life.
Spirits, you and I.
But like for someone like that, and don't get me wrong, I'll qualify this with saying that Mother Teresa had plenty of flaws and issues. Google it, take them seriously. But someone that we hold up, at least, as this saint of this person who was radically devoted and committed and believed in God, did that in spite of the fact that for 50 years of her life, she didn't sense the presence of God, is amazing to me, incredible, inexplicable. I think that there's a certain amount of defiance, of a defiant hope in faith. I think that's what I see in her. That's what I think keeps my faith together, is defiance, is this looking at the world and saying that this is not the way it has to be and that it can be better, and looking into that silence and believing that God is still at work and that God is still listening and that God is still here, even if it doesn't seem like it. I think that at its heart, even though it's not a word that we usually associate with, but I think defiance is part of faith, because you're believing in the unseen, and the intangible, and you're having hope, and that something better is going to happen. And hope is itself an act of defiance in response to the present.
If we absolutely saw what something was, it wouldn't be faith, it would be knowledge.
And I think that's what a lot of, evangelicalism, what I wanted, certainly, I didn't want faith, I wanted knowledge. Like faith sounds great, but I'd be much happier with, a video of the resurrection. I would be, much, happier if there was a mathematical formula for, the return of Jesus or something like that, and so, yeah, faith is defiant, and I think, and it's hopeful. And I think that defiant hope is what we cling to until we realize that that hope is spurred on by God, or at least that's what I call that hope,
Yeah.
and that's where I find my faith.
That is the evidence of God that I have continued to see, that the people that are brought into my life, and the defiance, that is a really good word. I had to write it down. Defiant hope. The defiance that even if a large chunk of me is saying, well, why doesn't God do anything about all the lies that are used in his name? Why does God have the worst fan base? Like, when all with the anger and the disappointment is saying, like, well, if God was real, why would all of this happen? And then I hear a million people say the free will, blah blah. I'm so free will. Stop telling me about that.
Yeah.
But yes, the defiance, that speaks to me. And defiance is one of the things that is like really called out, because evangelicalism calls for absolute submission to authority, even when the authority is continually hurting people over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But
that's good.
I want Jesus to be turning over tables. I want that holy defiance and that righteous anger to have a place and have a voice in this, and not this, especially for women. The women have been so silenced.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, but I say, yeah, but I don't know. As a guy, I mean, I'm aware of it as an outsider, but I can only imagine, I see it, with my wife a lot, in her own, work, which is not ministry, in which technically she should be equal, to her peers. But, even medicine, she, on paper, they should be treated the same way. But, in the workplace, women make what, 75 cents on the dollar still, or something like that, with men. I mean, we have a lot of work to do in the world.
Yes. And I'm so excited to have more and more conversations with people to uncover truth and history. Like, I actually got to have a conversation with David Hoffman. Have you heard of him?
I haven't, no.
Totally check out his channel.
Okay.
He's one of the first filmmakers, like, to take a big old camera in the 1960s and interview people on the streets that had never seen a video camera before.
Oh, like, wow.
He's got some incredible stories on his channel.
Yeah.
I actually got to have a conversation with him.
Very cool.
It's so weird to see my face, like, on one of his thumbnails. Like, this guy recorded BB King in the
awesome.
Like, it's nuts.
Yeah, I'll check that out. That's very cool.
But he's got interviews of people that were there at the Martin Luther King riots, like actual people in history, to uncover the truth. And it makes me excited to have the opportunities to do that. Yeah,
you should be. That's awesome. Keep talking, keep meeting people, keep traveling through YouTube, and getting out there, meeting folks. That's very cool.
I really want to thank you for this time. It's been really meaningful. And one of the awesome things about having these conversations is editing them afterwards and being able to hear it all over again and have it like wash over me without me thinking about what I want to say or thinking about something else. When the pressure's off, and then I can actually hear.
What are my kids doing right now? Where are they? Are they still alive? Where's my dog? Yeah. No, I totally understand.
Totally. So thank you. And I really, really appreciate it. It's really great to meet you.
Likewise. I absolutely. I love what you're doing. And like I said, once you're done, send me a link and I'll push it everywhere I can.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So the way that I end these videos is I give hugs. Hugs.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. We'll see ya.
See ya.